I will trim the beginning as I normally do.
Okay. Well, I should be handing over to Ray anyway. Hello, Ray.
Well,
Sorry.
whenever.
We happen to be speaking about the fact that I'm currently having a nervous breakdown on account of a visit from my daughter. So,
And we are minutes early, but you know, nervous. Good topic. I think we should have a whole session on, you know, my personal nervous breakdown, and we all bring, you know, it's sort of even better than having a poetry session, right?
oh dear.
I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. I've planned for one. I've sorted one, and I deserve one. So yes, I'm going to have it now,
and I'm determined to enjoy it.
Okay, hang on a minute. Yeah, got that. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I am as ready as I'm going to get, Ray.
Lovely.
Right, then.
Mary, hello, and Rosaline, of course. So good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, good people. And today is an interesting one. To continue with our varied series upon chatting with friends, or all you wanted to know about your friend and you didn't want to ask. Today, we have an interesting combination. Our friend Patsy will be chatting to David about his life and times. Patsy.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, David. Well, would you like to tell us just a bit about you know, where you grew up and what it was like, your childhood, for example?
Yeah, sure. Now, anybody can join in at any moment, obviously, but I'll put it on speaker view because for my recording, you do what you like, but this will just show up a bit better. So yeah, I grew up except the funny thing is I can't see me. So I'm gonna go back to gallery view. It was just a picture of you, and it would just show you. I grew up in Whitstable on the Kent coast, by the seaside, and I was born in 1947, just 2 years after the end of World War II. So I'm a sort of war baby, and little bit of family context. My father was a pharmacist, which I thought was a chemist, but he was a retail pharmacist. He was manager of the local Boots, and people knew him as Mr. Boots. And my mother was a nurse, and both of them had a partner during the war, had a daughter, and lost the partner through death or desertion, depending on whether we're talking about my dad or my mum. And so my father had to work, and he had a daughter, and he needed you know, help bringing them up. And my mother had a daughter and was working as a nurse, and that didn't work for her. So somebody living up the road from where I grew up, who was known forever as Uncle Ernest, introduced my mother to my father as a prospective housekeeper, which she became and moved into the house. And then various arrangements got rationalized and sorted, and they had 2 more children, myself and they married and had myself, and then a year or so later, my younger sister. So he grew up by the seaside. It was perfectly lovely. I adored, you know, well, you don't especially attach yourself. It is what it is, right? But growing up by the seaside is not at all bad. Our house was 200 or 300 or 400 yards from the sea. And, you know, you could get home, jump off the bus, run down to the beach and be in the water in 2 minutes, you know.
Oh, wow. Sounds like perfection to me.
It was definitely good enough. You know, it was just a very good childhood. You know, you grew up loving the sea and being by the sea in a fairly quiet rural town. Whitstable has become trendy now, but at the time it was the railway wasn't electrified to London. So it was a slow train distance from London and not an extension of London suburbs as it is now.
Right. And how about school? What was that like?
Well, my very, very first school was called Clare House School for Girls, and it was a little private school. And I'm told that on the first day I was dragged there screaming, and on the second day I insisted on going in with a hammer because I'd found a chair that was broken and I wanted to mend it. So I was always sort of been interested in carpentry and DIY and stuff like that. And so I adapted by finding a place for myself. And then I went to a private primary school or whatever it is. And then that got closed down. And I went to a state primary school and took whatever it is, 11 pluses, and then went to a grammar school in nearby Canterbury for the rest of my school days. Hey, there you go, Angela. You know Canterbury. Yeah, I went to Simon Langton Grammar in Canterbury, which was a really good school. I was lucky enough to do well in the 11 plus, blah blah blah. So you do all that stuff. You learn to drive whilst you're at school. You apply for university. You get a grant and a state scholarship. Life was very different in those days. It was pretty easy. So that's me, and that's me up to going to university.
Well, and where did you go, and what did you study?
Yeah, well, my dad was a pharmacist, right? So I always thought that meant chemist. As a boy, I did not have a chemistry set. You will be surprised to hear, and then relieved to understand that I had a laboratory. We had a shed in the garden, and it was a laboratory. And I knew, the first few years of grammar school chemistry before I ever went to grammar school, which turned out to be a handicap later because I learned very naturally from my dad, and I didn't actually learn how to learn properly before I went to university. And university chemistry, it turns out, to get a good degree, you're studying 3 different topics. So 3 floors in our university chemistry building: physical chemistry, inorganic chemistry, and organic chemistry. And organic chemistry, you need to virtually memorize a large number of complex synthesis recipes. And I just didn't know how to do it. I did not learn them. I could not learn them.
What happened?
Yeah, well, I would have and did graduate with a bad degree. I got an attendance certificate, but between my second, but I could blag, right? Everybody expected I was going to get a good degree because I could, seminars and tutorials were a breeze, because I would talk about the stuff that I knew, and everybody thought I knew everything. Not true. But between my second and third years, I got, as you often do, a vacation job, and it was an internship at an agricultural research laboratory in not too far distant Sittingbourne, which meant I bought a minivan so that I could get from home to this place, and I had this internship with this petrochemical company, but in their agricultural laboratory. And I discovered that I was working on a cover-up. I was doing soil chemistry, looking at the decomposition projects of a fruit spray, which did its job properly.
It's Robin here.
Yes.
Just to say that I've rung Alan.
Hang on a second.
Marion, do you want to mute yourself, or does somebody want to mute Marion there?
Someone needs to. Oh,
there we go.
that's it.
That's
Sorry.
good.
Okay.
Good morning, Marion. They got this fruit spray which worked very nicely to kill whether it's a bug or a pest or a fungus. I don't even remember, but it did that. But it had the unfortunate side effect of killing the trees as well. And they were a bit worried that the customers, the farmers, would figure out that it was their fruit spray that was killing their trees. And so I was doing soil science to figure out what was going on in the soil. And what I realized this is a bit silly, was I wasn't a really very good chemist. What I figured out as a result of my work was that this fruit spray was, I'm going to use a technical term here, a poison, right? And it did what poisons do. It killed stuff, right? So it killed the bugs and it killed the tree. And of course, what we weren't doing was looking to see whether the fruit spray was in the fruit and what effect it would have on people eating the fruit, right? So what I really, and we had there wasn't a single thing in our course about social responsibility in science or ethics. So and my father had a stroke. So I was left without, if you like, proper training for my moral compass and not really able to talk to my father about it. And
sorry, David, could I please interrupt?
Yeah.
You didn't ever go to Y College, did you? Which is the agricultural department of London University. The reason I ask is my grandparents lived in Y. And are buried in Y churchyard. I just want you to know, just out of nosiness.
No, how completely lovely. My granddad was a Methodist lay preacher, and he lived in Chartham, which isn't far from Y at all. And he had a bookbinder's shop. This is my maternal grandfather. He had a bookbinder's shop just up the road from Canterbury Cathedral, and he bound the books for the cathedral library. So my paternal grandfather was a butcher in Folkestone from basically a nautical family. They were excisemen, fishermen, and smugglers, like you are if you're on the coast.
It's just interesting how my history relates with yours. My sister went to Folkestone Technical College. I'm a little bit older than you, but she went to Folkestone Technical College. So all these Kent names are just resounding with me in a brilliant way.
Yeah. Well, yes, there's all sorts of, family histories. You could go on for hours about that. I'm sort of skipping through all that. I'd love to come back to it. I had one that there was a family, there were Cornish connections, and one of my aunts was once asked, whatever happened to that old rogue Tiddy about somebody who everybody knew? And she said, I married him. Right. So, the life. So after that, that was a bit scary, realizing that I was, so I was having a lovely time at this wonderful research lab out in the country, but doing stuff that was a bit questionable. But actually, I learned to program in Fortran there, and I made a lot of use of Shell's main computer in the Shell Centre in London. It was a Univac 1108, I remember, and it was a very powerful machine. And I used it from a remote terminal in this agricultural lab. Fantastic, great fun. And what I did was I organized that when I got back to university after the summer, there was a notice up on the notice board advertising a Christmas course in data processing. And I applied for that, and it was run by Procter & Gamble. I went on this Christmas course. I learned programming I had a lovely time. And by the time I graduated, I had got 4 job offers in computing, not chemistry. I got chemistry job offers, but I got 4 open job offers in computing. And I shifted career as soon as I graduated.
It sounds it sounds as if along the way you did learn how to learn, David.
When I look back on it, I did this while I was still at school. At the end of the last year, I skived off from school and went to a technical college and took a course on programming. So, this is sort of, looking back on it, that's impossibly cute. I was obviously very nerdy, and nothing was going to get in the way of me doing what I really wanted to do. So right through university, I was using computers, and there was only one computer, and it wasn't for students, right? But that didn't stop me.
Obviously, going to be your thing.
Yeah.
So which of the job offers did you choose?
Well, I took it. I had the civil service and Welcome, Beecham's, and Shell and Procter and Gamble. And
Wow.
Procter and Gamble had run this course, and I decided to join them. And they were a very successful marketing company, and they were often attacked, pilloried in the press at times for being part of a monopoly, an oligopoly in detergents. But when people would investigate the company, they would say, the quality of the management was impressive. And Shell was actually, it was a management training school. So it was, it was a really great place to go for a starter job.
Oh.
Sorry, did I say Shell? I meant I meant Procter and Gamble, whether I said it or not.
And where was this geographically?
Well, that was in Newcastle, right? And I went to university in Nottingham. Funnily enough, we're in Bristol. My first choice university was Bristol. It had a very good chemistry department. But Nottingham gave me an interview first and made an unconditional offer. And my father had gone to Nottingham, and I liked Nottingham when I visited, so I accepted it. So it took me another 50 years to wind up in Bristol, kind of thing. And in Nottingham, I thought from London, from Whitstable, Nottingham was the far north, right? But from Nottingham, you get in a car and you head north, and you go a long way before you get to Newcastle, right? So I found what the north really was, but I liked it. Newcastle seemed like a fun place, and it seemed like, well, this is going to be good enough for a starter job, and in those days it was like, I'll join this company and I'll be with them forever, ha ha ha. But I did join them, and I became a programmer there, and more computers, and life was good.
What were you like for making friends at that stage, David? I mean, you seem a very outgoing person, so I imagine you had a lot.
No, well, I'm massively introverted and nerdy, but the way that you make friends is through shared interests. And I liked walking. But I had my eldest sister got a job in Lancashire, which became a holiday caravan. What came with the job eventually was a holiday caravan in the Lake District. And my younger sister and I, who hated the idea of ever going on what my parents would call a holiday, which meant not being at the seaside, why would you want to do that? We would resist that very firmly. And so we would be looked after by aunts or elder sisters while our parents went off on a holiday, which was probably great. They got away from the kids, it must have been much better for them. But then eventually we would start going up to the Lake District for holidays, and I loved walking in the fells. So Newcastle was just a quick run over the military road and down the M6 or whatever it was to get to the Lake District. So I sort of there were the Northumberland Hills, there were the Lake District Hills, and I was basically sharing flats with co-workers, other young people who were working at P&G. And I don't know about social life. Well, as a programmer, right? Social life is the people you talk to while you're at work during the day, followed by staying behind in the office and programming when there's nobody around, because that's the best time for writing computer programs. So I was often working in the evening because that was the most productive time.
Right.
So I'd go to the theatre and movies and listen to music, stuff like all the young people stuff.
And how long did you stay there in that job?
Yeah, I was there for about 6 years, during which I experienced some stress problems. I mean, I was very focused on doing my programming, and I loved doing that, but the management was a little bit ossified, and I would be wanting to push things ahead technically and meeting some resistance, and had a review once where they said, you know, we like you, David, you write really good code, it's fast, it's easy to maintain, you're, you know, really productive, but we don't understand you, right? And that's actually the death knell, because if they can't understand you, it means in some way you don't fit in and you're not promotion material. But by that time, funnily enough, I had an angel. Because I got stress symptoms, and that eventually led to my learning transcendental meditation. Not at all unusual in that area, right? You know, you could happily say, you know, in those days, everybody learned TM and people would just sort of nod and that was it, right? I haven't even heard of it these days, but I learned TM, and it had an immediate and profound effect on my health and mental clarity. I could feel things joining up in my head. My brain became more integrated, and my work became not visibly more creative, but more productive, because I was just producing clean, solid systems faster. Right. At some point, Maharishi decided to do a UK tour, and I thought, in my naivety, that would be a great idea if we invited all the managers at Procter & Gamble to come and see Maharishi in Durham. And it was sort of like my managers like freaked out. But there was an appeals procedure, and I wrote a letter to the director of personnel, a man called Tony Bradley, and he invited me to go and see him, which meant going over to the main building in the director's wing, you know, and as you know, sort of like real trepidation. But I went in, he was really friendly, and he knew a bit about meditation. He said, well, we can't have all the people come to, can't invite all the managers to see Maharishi, but I'll go and see him, right? And he showed up at Maharishi's talk in Durham, and funnily enough, sat down next to a girlfriend's mother, right? And I was sort of running around helping get things in a brand new suit, helping get things organized for Maharishi. And he turned to the lady sitting next to him and said, oh, I know him. And she said, so do I. And he became, it turned out, I met his daughter. His daughter ended up being Lady Deputy Mayoress in Bristol. And so I met her, and she knew about me and contacted Tony, and it turned out he had been something of a guardian angel. And whenever some possibility had opened up for me, he made sure that the path was, the way was smoothed. Right. And I became factory systems manager in their Manchester factory, which gave me a lot more, you know, so I moved to Manchester, had freedom and independence, job to, so, you know, I had a good career with them. And eventually I decided I was interested to pursue what I was learning from meditation about consciousness. You know, this is like you're a kid, you've been brought up in the educational system, you learn to meditate because everybody's doing it. And I only ever learned, I read about Krishnamurti and Alan Watts and all sorts, and, you know, Be Here Now and all those things. And I read loads of stuff and thought, this is not for me, this is wacky. But there was a full page article in The Guardian about Maharishi, written by a guy called John Windsor. And it was, this is not wacky. This is, Maharishi was a scientist. He studied with a mystic. He's taken technology, mental technology, consciousness technology, developed it, packaged it for the West. It's not a religion, it's a lifestyle. It produces measurable changes. It's being studied scientifically, blah, blah, blah. 5-6 columns of it. And even had a picture of Maharishi with the Beatles at the bottom, you know, the wacky time. But the caption was, Britain's 20,000 meditators have kept a low profile since the Beatles episode. And I thought, okay, well, if that was a bit of an embarrassment to the TM movement, then that's almost a recommendation. I love their music, but, you know. So I wanted to become a TM teacher, and the company almost gave me a sabbatical to do it, but not quite. But it came as close as that. And by that time, I had been working with an early computer time-sharing system, which meant sitting in the factory and using a terminal connected to a computer that was, well, there were two of them. One was down in Surrey somewhere with W.S. Atkins, and another was in Toronto with a company called IP Sharp Associates. So I was experimenting with computer networks in their very earliest form. And so I basically left Procter & Gamble, cashed in my pension fund. My flatmate sold my house while I was in Switzerland on this 6-month course. And I came back to a job as a marketing manager in a computer company.
Wow. And then at what point did you go to America?
Well, look, so to make things to whiz through, I've got a slide that I can show you that is kind of my life, but in one picture. I think if it'll work, shares screen, right? That looks blank, right? Resume or CV as we call it, right? And this is my life color coded up to the year 2011, not 2021. So this slide was made 12 years ago. And what I had started to notice, certainly not at the beginning, was that I would do something for a while and I would get good at it. And then I would, whilst I've been doing the good bit, I was morphing into doing something different. And much later, you know, in the 2000, Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote a book called Blink and other interesting books, wrote a book called Outliers. And an outlier is somebody who learns something before other people do and spends at least 10,000 hours doing it. And you become an expert. So how did Bill Gates form Microsoft? And the answer is all the way through school, he had access to a very powerful mini computer through family connections. So he was programming computers before everybody else, right? So I had my time at Procter & Gamble learning computing, and then I became marketing manager for a real computer company using high tech. And then that job came to an end in an amusing way, but it's a different story, another story for another time perhaps. And I was able to go on an adventure. Maharishi was running experiments, putting groups of people in trouble spots to meditate. And, you know, 3 days after I left this job with IP Sharp with nothing in mind, I was asked if I would like to go somewhere hot for Maharishi. And it didn't mean temperature, it meant, you know, interesting. I went to Syria while there was a civil war going on in the Lebanon. And, you know, all of this is immensely topical, you know, and I've been in that. And then after that, I was in Iran for a while, which is equally topical. I was in Iran when the Shah left with a huge meditation group there, but not big enough to bring peace, according to Maharishi. And I left Iran on one of the last aircraft to leave Iran. And it was basically, you went out to the airport and they shoveled you on a plane. You didn't have to have a ticket. They were just getting people out of the country. And my little group got put on a plane to Paris, and we were on the same plane as the Ayatollah's brother, who was going to Paris to pick up his brother and take him back to Iran to lead the revolutionary government. So like, so wonderful story. Yeah. And then I came back, and then, oh God, what was that all about? What do I do now? And I putzed around for a year and then got myself headhunted to Silicon Valley. And I had 7 years living in Silicon Valley, doing nothing particularly remarkable, but I was in an environment where there were a lot more TM centers. And Maharishi had got a university in America. And after 7 years, I went and spent 3 years there. And I wasn't studying. I was working as a carpenter in the community, but enjoying the community life. And the population was growing at the university, and we would meditate morning and evening in these wonderful big wooden domes, painted golden, very sort of flashy, very blingy. And the pitch was that when the group was big enough, America would find itself without an enemy. And that was what Maharishi was saying to him. What on earth does that mean, right? And it came to pass that in those days, Gorbachev wrote his book Perestroika and dismantled the USSR. And in those days, America found itself without an enemy. And we were sitting there meditating, saying, my God, will you just look at that? What Maharishi said was going to happen. Everybody else was saying, what's happening? And we were saying, what's happening is what Maharishi said was going to happen. And it's happening because we reached critical mass. And it's like, wow. And then one day I don't normally hear voices, but I was walking out of meditation one morning and I heard a voice very clearly say, I'm ready, right? Now, the difficulty with that is it obviously wasn't somebody else saying it. You know, so it's sort of, but it sounded, you know, it was clear and outside my body. And I no way of explaining it, but what I knew was that it meant I was out of there. Whatever I was there for, I was ready and it was time to go home. And at the same time, my family called me and said, are you coming home for your mother's 80th birthday? And I sort of went, well, apparently, yes. And I got a ticket and came back to England. So that's my 10 years in America.
God, yeah. Oh, it's just amazing. So I hadn't really, well, I certainly hadn't realized, you know, the extent of what you'd done, you know, with I didn't even, I'm so ignorant, I didn't even know how to pronounce you. All I knew was the Beatles stuff. I knew about the Maharishi, which is how I pronounced it, and his time with the Beatles, and I knew it from the newspapers. That was all.
Well, you know, you and me both. And I went in, I became, so I had, Maharishi came to this event in Newcastle, right? And, you know, and my boss's boss was there, and girlfriend's mum. And Maharishi had a press conference in the morning. And I actually stayed in the hotel where he stayed, you know, kind of obvious thing to do. And went to the press conference. You know, I hung out as much as I possibly could, given the opportunity to see the guy. He was coming to Durham where I was. Amazing. And at the press conference, he was sitting there at the front and the press hadn't arrived. So I sort of, much trepidation, went up to his secretary and said, I wonder if it's possible to have a word with Maharishi. And the secretary, you know, just sort of pointed at Maharishi as if, well, you know, go ahead. And I went over to Maharishi and I was sort of, you know, all trembling and sort of devotee kind of thing. And I sort of blurted out, you know, I'd like to thank you for the meditation. And Maharishi said, yes, yes. And then I thought, well, and then I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help, right? And he said, well, are you a teacher of TM and SCI? There was a course about consciousness that you could study in England, videotape course. And I sort of thought, what I thought was, well, you know, you're a guru, you must be able to tell, you know, how I am unclean or whatever. But, you know, he'd asked a straight question, so I gave a straight answer and I just said no. And he said, then it will be good to become a teacher of TM. And I thought, yes, you know, that's what I want. But he's told me, it's not, I'm trying to do it. I've got his instructions, I've got his permission. And so I said, you know, well, okay, so how do I go about that? You know, what do I do? As in, you know, are you like Jesus? You know, do I leave my nets at the shore and follow you, or what? And he said, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm working in business. And he said, then it will be good to stay in business and teach. And he had this plan, which was the idea of TM centers everywhere and one teacher for every 1,000 members of the population. So he just said that, you know, be good to go stay in business and teach. And so I basically engineered that I ended up on the teacher training course. And when I came back off the teacher training course, I joined a business and I stayed in business. I didn't go and teach full time like so many of my friends did. So I was within business, I was the freak who meditated, but within the TM movement, I was the straight guy who'd got a job. You know, and so I did get to America, but I didn't go straight to his university. I went and worked in Silicon Valley, and it was only Silicon Valley dried up. There was a thing called well before the dot-com revolution, there was a time. Oh yeah, right. So that's my resume, but here's a layer of my life overlaid on that, right?
Right.
And so the first slab is mainframe computers. The second slab is high tech and my time in Silicon Valley when the IBM PC came out and the Macintosh and Microsoft Office. Now, during my 10 years in Silicon Valley, if you wanted to do a spreadsheet, you would buy an Apple Mac and you would buy Ashton Tate's, whatever it was, spreadsheet program. If you wanted to do a word processor, you'd buy a different computer and WordStar 2000. If you wanted to do a database, you'd buy a different computer and DBase 2. And you would then discover you got 3 computers and no way of cutting and pasting from either of them to anything, right? And then suddenly Microsoft, and I had friends who were working on the next best spreadsheet, the next best database, the next best this in Silicon Valley. And then Microsoft came out with Microsoft Office and it wiped the market clean. Nobody was going to buy your better word processing system because they were going to buy Microsoft's rubbish word processor that came for the same price as a word processor with a spreadsheet and a database and presentation graphics. And everybody was buying Microsoft Office. And so jobs in Silicon Valley dried up. And we had what I call, well before the dot-com revolution, we had the microcomputer software nuclear winter. Because the Microsoft atom bomb had blown away all software development in Silicon Valley. And there really wasn't work. There wasn't investment money. And that's why a friend gave me a Volkswagen bus and I jumped in it and I drove to Maharishi International University in Iowa because there was no point in being in Silicon Valley. And I got a friend who was a high-tech worker and he said, David, you know, you're a high-tech guy. He was from Silicon Valley. You're into high-tech. You should be getting a really highly paid computer job. But you don't know anything about Hewlett-Packard, which is what he was working on, and I've got a room that needs painting. Would you? So I became a $7 an hour room painter, and then I became a $15 an hour carpenter working with a buddy, and I worked as a carpenter for 3 years in Mauritius University, absorbing all that, and then I came back. So that sort of filled in a little bit, and so when I came back with a Macintosh and Microsoft Office. So all of the work leading up to them had been about developing the computer technology that every nerd wanted for themselves. So I don't have to use somebody else's computer. And I came back from America with exactly what I had gone there to help develop. I hadn't worked at Apple, but I got a Mac and Microsoft Office. And that meant I could do anything. So I worked as a project manager, a carpenter, but also as I started running seminars on the internet, which was just coming out, and stuff like that. And so I went between, and I started doing seminars for businesses, and I ended up doing 2 big jobs as a management trainer. And that was my sort of graduate. So I was a sort of consultant project manager. Oh, everything went away on my screen then. Consultant, I clicked the wrong button. You're still seeing the share, I think. And so what I was then a user of this technology, watching it evolve, watching the internet and Wi-Fi appear, watching desktop computers appear, a device with music in it, the iPod, and then eventually a device with a computer and the internet in it, the iPhone. The last bit of the slide, I've said, it all ends up with everything integrated in the iCloud. And I made this slide in 2011, just before, a few months before Steve Jobs died. So my memorial to him is, if you will, please put your eyes on the iCloud in the bottom right. I added Steve Jobs ascending to the iCloud when he died. Right? And in 2011, I drew an analogy that there's a hard uphill path and then it's all downhill. And you eventually end up with an integrated ecosystem of something, and it's going to be the same. By this time, I was just arriving in Bristol. I was in Bristol and I got an iPhone. And I was saying, and I was in the Green Capital Group, working for the owner of Hamilton House in Stokes Croft, doing sustainability stuff. And as far as he was concerned, I could do whatever I liked, just sort of get on with it. I was on his business plan in a little box on the bottom left as retained consultant, meaning, just do whatever you like. We'll have conversations, we'll go for coffee, and you'll work on renewable, you'll work on sustainability one way or another. I was interested in housing and energy. And so I said, look, this is what's going to happen. The energy revolution is going to follow a similar curve. There's going to be uphill stuff, but there's grants, So at first, a solar panel cost $250,000. The only thing you would put it on would be a satellite, because, there's no diesel power in space, right? But the chip technology evolved, and eventually feed-in tariffs arrived, and that for me was the tipping point. As Microsoft Office and the Mac were the tipping point in computers, feed-in tariffs brought solar energy to the point where it was as cheap as grid energy. First, for you in your house, and secondly, even for a company that generates energy, it was as cheap to buy solar energy, to generate solar energy, as it was to build a gas generator. And to me, that was the tipping point, although it would take a while. There were still feed-in tariffs for all the way up to 2019. But I was saying an ecosystem will emerge around solar, and I put those words on the slide in 2011. Predicting, and by 2022, I wasn't saying that the high-tech revolution ended in 2011, but certainly the iPhone had come out, and it hasn't changed significantly. Well, it has. Lots has changed in the internals, and it's now got artificial intelligence, but it's still a flat screen that you touch, connected to the internet. That's just been, and solar's done the same thing. It's a whole ecosystem has developed. And now it's just going to spread out and be implemented, in my view. Just to sort of, okay, so that at the end of that year, I was saying, that's it, 2012. And the first thing I did at the start of January this year was run a discussion group with you guys on the age of energy abundance. So I had been completely prophetic, as far as I was concerned, time-wise, that everything would be in place for an age of energy abundance. And, that brings us, that's this year, right? So, that's a sort of diagrammatic tour, and that's my CV attached to the two revolutions that I've been involved in. And those stripes, by the way, also, to my mind, correspond to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're the layers. So I've been punching through the layers of Maslow, and if I just purely from time-wise and from my evolution, I've sort of just exited Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at which point it's sort of like, well, you've got all the tools, what do you want to do with it?
I'm going. In a minute, I'm going to give everyone else a chance to ask questions.
Yeah.
But I tell you what I would really like to know. I notice you have got a brilliant sense of humour, and I would like to know in what respects you found your sense of humour a survival tool, if you like, something that really benefited you through your extremely interesting life.
I have a lovely German friend called Sylvia Zimmerman, who I met in a TM community in England. She now lives in Auroville in India, and she's had brain tumors and stuff like that. And she's just the most wonderfully positive person. And she once said, once you've learned to laugh at yourself, you'll be amused for the rest of your life. Right? And I think that's the point, you know. Of course, it's effortless to get caught up in your own troubles and the troubles of the world. I mean, right now is, you know, this is a desperately serious time for the world. But you get up in the morning and you see your friends and you go out for coffee and you do what you can do. And you say, well, there's nothing I can do about what's going on in Palestine at the moment, apart from wish them well. And there's nothing I can do for the Ukraine. Though I go to the Quaker Ukraine meeting for peace, right? So I go to a daily Quaker meeting about, which is a kind of meditation for peace in Ukraine. That's the closest I can get to it. So you do what you can, and then you do whatever else you feel inclined to do. And, you know, this Bristol remains a wonderful playground for people who are interested in the Green Revolution and all that, you know, because there's just lots going on.
Mm.
So, you know, a sense of humor comes from basically laughing at yourself, I think, more than anything else.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I should perhaps ask Ray to do this because he's good at it, but I want to ask people if they would like to ask you questions.
You stay in the seat. Well.
Okay. Who would like to?
And anybody can shout anyway.
Yeah. Hattie.
When Ray's got his finger up too. Yeah, Hattie.
Oh, sorry. That's fine.
You are muted.
Hattie, you're muted.
Yeah, we muted you because you were clattering around when you arrived or something. Or that was Marion. Whoever. Anyway, anybody who's muted needs to unmute before they speak. Hattie, you haven't figured it out. Shall we have Ray until you've figured out how to unmute yourself? Ray, you had a question.
Okay. This is one because I spent most of my life in psychology and things like that, and I can be slightly naughty and ask this. Has there ever been considered a Mrs. or Mr. David Saunders?
I have been really fortunate to have some lovely girlfriends down the way, who, you know, some of whom I loved absolutely to pieces and would happily have been with. But I was also a little bit of a nerd, a little bit blinkered on my, you know, I need to do this. And it was like, if I settled down here, I'd have to get a more stable job. And it wouldn't work. It would not. I kind of need to be on this. So there has been the potential, but basically I've been, you know, on my path. But you know that's not so. And I thought you were heading in the psychology stuff to other stuff, but being in California, I came across a lot of psychological stuff, like, you know, for instance, you know, just there was the whole EST movement in California, Werner Erhard, and there was, who is it, developed active listening, all sorts of great psychologists, and Rogerian, Carl Rogers, right? developed this thing called active listening, where you listen to somebody and you listen to what they're saying, but you're looking for the emotion as well. And I was talking to somebody once, and they said, "You must have felt something, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh, right. So you know Carl Rogers too." And I found that I got a few hints that allowed me to facilitate groups and to ease my way into corporate consulting and stuff like that. And I would learn something. I studied the works of Tom Peters on business changes, you know, how things change, and I was able to get a job with a consulting group that worked with his stuff. And when I was working with Vondenberg in the Netherlands, we were teaching Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which was a book I'd picked up just a few years before, and found that there was a group in England that worked with it, contacted them, and then they said, "Oh, we got a contract. We need people to work." You know, so I've lucked into stuff based on becoming interested in something just a little bit ahead of the curve. Sorry, I'm not sure I even answered your question, Ray. Did I answer your question? Oh, yeah, Mrs. Saunders. Well, bring her on. You know, I do have a very sweet, good friend in Germany who is a nurse, and she's just retired, and we've been good friends for some years. And I think it's very good for her mental health that there's a certain amount of distance between us. And that she doesn't have to put up with me all the time. And she has children over there and would always live in Germany, and that works just fine. So I have a nice long distance relationship. And
yes, so sometimes love blows us over, so we can't actually. We don't know what it is, but you know, it just makes us do very silly.
Well, we do know what it is. It's endorphins, you know, it's dopamine, serotonin. Yeah, Hattie knows exactly which endorphins it is, right? And it's you do things which trigger addictive states as much as anything, beneficial stuff as well. But you know, we are biological beings, and our higher mind is easily overtaken by chemicals coursing through our bloodstream.
I think we'd have to discuss this further at another time. But anyway,
you did you had your finger up, but you were muted. Have you got a question?
Is that me?
Yeah.
Yes, you dare.
Yeah. No, I did find I had to slide to find the tab, to the icon to switch the mute on.
Yeah.
Yes, David. I was listening to somebody from the government talking about energy, and how actually this talk about having enough energy isn't very realistic, because the demand for energy is increasing faster than the production of energy. So what's your comment on that, do you think?
Well, my comment is you ought to be able to trust your government, but it's a long time since that's been possible. And the government ought to be working for the good of the people, and that's not been true for a very long time now, which is why I'm working on community energy. And it turns out that here's a little story which comes at it obliquely. If you live on a Greek island, you can see ships coming into your harbor, and all your energy is coming on those ships, right? The fuel for your cars, but also it's bringing in petrol or diesel to run generators to generate your island's electricity. And it turns out that so you know what your energy bill is, because you can see it's coming on the boat, and you're paying over the odds for the oil and the petrol. And it turns out if you spend something like 3 times your annual budget for energy on wind turbines and solar, after that, you'll be generating all the energy you need. So you can sell yourself that energy at half the price and pay off the capital cost in 6 or 10 years, right? Now, if you're intelligent, you then go, well, the United Kingdom is an island, but let's think of Bristol as an island. Let's generate as much of our energy as we can locally and we should end up with it being mostly renewable and cheaper than what we've got at the moment, right? And, you know, let the government witter. And the answer is, well, of course they would say that, wouldn't they? You know, Rishi Sunak's wife has a big shares in a company that has a huge contract with Shell Petrochemical. Yeah. I saw this wonderful cartoon which has a picture of Rishi Sunak in a group, and it's at Shell, and he's wearing a little badge saying Employee of the Year. Right? And so, you know, our government is still massive subsidies being paid to fossil energy companies.
Yeah.
But if you remember, just to run on, we had a Governor General of the Bank of England, a Canadian, Mark Carney, and he was saying, you fossil energy people, you got to watch out. And you got to watch out because you're not going to be able to get all your assets out of the ground. We will have switched to a renewable energy economy before you have been able to realize the value of the things that you have got in your balance books as assets, right? So all these countries with trillions of dollars in oil under the ground, most of that oil will not now be mined. Those countries will suffer a catastrophic collapse at the time that solar reaches and wind reach the tipping point. And you think, well, you know, when's that going to be? And I'm just going to pop back to my slides for a moment on account of the next slide. Here's one, Age of Energy Abundance. Is it closer than we think? I think, oh, right. I did the wrong thing there. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to reshare. I'm going to come back to my slide. Bing, bang. Here we are. Slightly different.
It was one of the slides from your talk.
Full screen. Yeah. Age of Energy Abundance, right? Now, this next slide, this is from Wikipedia. And that straight line is the growth of solar energy, but it's on a logarithmic chart. So what it means is that solar energy is, if you look at the chart, it's growing by a factor of 10 about every 7 years. And so I thought,
actually it's a log chart. So that is the problem, that the government wasn't reading the log chart.
Yeah. None of the energy industry, all the energy industry always predict that the growth of renewable energy will be linear. They always predict it. And then they note it grew faster than we expected last year. And every year is no exception to that rule. And if you've got growth on a log chart, and if you took this into a classroom and took that red line that I've put in off, and you say, now children, where do you think that line's going to go? They're going to draw the red line I've put there. Now, so the question is, when does that reach? I could put a slightly more pessimistic one, but you know, that's the worst line you could possibly draw through those points. And it still reaches some point in 2032. Why have I stopped in 2032? Answer, because that's when it reaches total world energy generation. Or around the same time, total world total energy consumption. Not 2050, it isn't, can we get to a zero carbon economy by 2050? But if everybody in government sat there and did absolutely nothing except work on maximizing their pension fund and ripping off the country, we will get to 100% renewable energy around 2032, whether you like it or not, as a result of nerds and the wind and solar technical revolutions. How will they take over from renewable energy? Because they're cheaper.
And who will own them, David? Is it not Shell?
Oh, well, yeah. No? Well, now it turns out, now guess where the best place to put solar energy is?
Yeah.
It's on your roof. How much solar energy is the room for on our roofs? 50 gigawatts. What is our maximum energy consumption on a sunny day in the UK? Only 40 gigawatts.
Oh, wow.
So on a sunny day, we can make more solar energy than we can use. So So you put solar energy on all our roofs with some batteries, and then you start playing. But you haven't completely solved all our energy. You haven't solved vehicles. You haven't solved winter heating, but you've gone a good long way towards it. And the question then is, who would decide who's going to put solar energy on our roofs? And the answer, well, they're our roofs, right? So we could decide, we could set up a cooperative and we could offer the money. And then you go back to Mark Carney and you say, Mark, what are you doing these days? And he says, oh, yeah, I'm chief executive of a Canadian asset fund called Brookfield. And you think, oh, the Archers, lovely. And I'm chief executive of a Canadian asset fund. And guess how much we've got altogether? We've got about 800 billion. And so guess how much of that is renewable energy? 68 billion. Oh. Guess how much of it is fossil energy? None of it.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Right? So for people who are saying, when are our pension funds going to invest in the right thing? And the pension funds say, well, where's the work? Where's the opportunity to invest in renewable energy? And the answer is, go and talk to Brookfield. They don't have a problem. Right? And Brookfield are looking to expand. And so what we are, and so since the Age of Energy Abundance talk in January, I've been talking out of the blue to a solar energy company up in Yorkshire who happened to have a connection through a European energy fund with Brookfield. And the first time I talked to these people, they said, could you put 100 million of solar on Bristol roofs for us?
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I said, well, you just hold a few community meetings and you say, and what's the deal? What's the deal? And they said, well, we'll pay for it. You know, any solar you can put on, we'll pay for it. Well, how do you want the money back? Do we have to have a roof lease and stuff? No, we just want an agreement with an energy company that we want somebody trustworthy to sign a power purchase agreement for the energy coming from what we've paid to generate, right? So they buy a wind farm, and as long as they've got an agreement from somebody to buy the energy, they're happy.
And so that's the government put their foot in the door.
No, well, it could be, but you say,
I thought it was difficult to get connected to the grid, and that's a real limiting factor.
Yeah, but it's not difficult to get connected to the grid if the solar's on your roof, because you don't need to be connected to the grid, right? And you could have local connections. You could connect one house to the next without going beyond your local substation.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a huge amount you can do without using the grid.
But David, is it a source of optimism that Dale Vince, the CEO or former CEO of Ecotricity, seems to be very well genned up and is saying he's going to give money to the Labour Party to help them get in government, so that hopefully, is this a positive move on the part of Dale Vince, the former CEO, I think, of Ecotricity?
Well, yeah, he's got a bunch of companies, and he was contributing to Just Stop Oil. And then he said, well, he's talked to Ed Miliband, and Ed Miliband is saying, well, the best way to stop oil is to invest in Labour's energy policy, which is to be decarbonised by 2030. We'll have a state energy generating company. We'll invest $1 billion a year in generation, including 400 million for communities. We'll allow local authorities to run their own bus services. We'll nationalize the trains, blah, blah, blah. Now, a lot of that will have died with Starmer, because Starmer's saying, don't say stuff that's too outrageous. We just want people to vote for us. And you don't know what he'll do once he's elected. But basically, if you have already said, not only it's wonderful that you're going to put 400 million in community energy, but we've already got 100 million just in Bristol lined up, so, when you've got it, when you come and talk to us, but we're not going to wait.
Brilliant.
And so Dale Vince, yes, very intelligent man, pathfinder in wind energy, but now we've got a community group set up with a wind turbine that was project managed by the warden of Bristol Central Quaker meeting.
Oh, wow.
right?
Wow.
You know, so you know, we're on our way. You know, we're doing it ourselves. You know,
Okay.
and the more
David,
and the skills exist in the community. Hattie,
another question then about these top two lines, the blue and the green.
yeah,
It's a bit small for me to read. World energy commitment, no, consumption.
Yeah.
How do we know it's going to go down? And world electricity. Ah, it's enlarged. Thank you. World electricity generation.
Yeah. So
how do we know that's?
Well, the reason it works, world electricity generation will keep, and if we end up, suppose world electricity generation consumption doubles, well, 2 years later, the generation will have doubled. So, you know, we'll be there.
What about all the
total
stuff?
So total energy, to make electricity, what you do is you dig coal out of the ground and you shunt it around. There's all sorts of energy used before primary energy becomes useful electricity. So primary energy use goes down because you're electrifying most of your economy. So you're using more electricity, but you're using less primary because of the waste involved in generating fossil energy being replaced by the zero waste involved in generating wind and solar electricity.
Got it.
So it's just a quirk, but the point is, you know, it's that there's give or take a year in there, but we're talking somewhere around 2032, not anything like 2050 is like aspirational for all the people who go to big meetings in jets and talk to each other and call each other president and yes sir and your excellency and, you know, do you mind if I invade your country and all that stuff. And meanwhile we're sort of all beavering away, working with the working with the nerds who are running the renewable industry and saying, and going around saying, look, you've got a gas-fired power plant there. Would you mind if I set up a solar farm in the next door field and sell you electricity at half the price? And they say, how can you do that? And they say, don't worry about it. And they're saying, because I can generate it at a quarter the price. Or whatever, you know, that's basically the story is.
And what about the metals for the solar batteries?
Yeah,
that won't be unlimited supply.
Well, if you look at a solar panel is basically fried sand.
No, I'm talking about the batteries.
Yeah, well, so read the latest. A massive power plant, a massive source of lithium has been discovered in North America, if lithium were needed. But people are working on lithium iron and lithium sulfide batteries. So the technology is shifting very, very quickly. And if you go 2 or 3 generations down the road with electric vehicles, we will actually put the electric power. You remember trams that had overhead wires and where the electricity was coming from a power station to the tram, and the tram was very light because all it had was an electric motor, right? Well, we'll have electric cars with electric motors picking up electricity from the roadway. They won't have to have batteries. That might be 10 or 20 years down the road, but that's how we will evolve to very lightweight vehicles because they won't have to have batteries. They'll just have an electric motor, and so on. Or, you know, the point is that the technology, once you've thrown a 6 in technology, it only gets better. You're in the game and you're improving it. And yeah, the snakes and ladders, it gets worse, and it gets better. But basically, you're racing to get to the top square.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, David. I really enjoyed that. And I'm now handing over to Ray to conclude the session.
Yeah.
Good. Folks, I was supposed to Lumen. I'm sure you'll agree. Next week, this was something very different. We have Gordon Purdy dowsing
Great.
Wow.
pursuit.
Wow.
Ray, I'm so sorry. There might be a problem. I had a call from Gordon just before joining you this morning. He's with True Speed, and his house and all the people on his street have been kind of wiped out because another internet company came to lay their cables and apparently burned through some of the cables of True Speed. And so he's not sure whether he'll be back online by Friday. There's all sorts of shenanigans going on, and he's had to get a different phone number. But he just wanted me to pass on to give you a heads up to have a plan B, just in case he can't get online to do his presentation. Of course, he would do it at a different time. But can I leave that with you to
worry about?
I think Patsy and I will have to discuss that.
Yeah.
Room for a phrase from a Douglas Adams novel, which is, "We apologize for the inconvenience."
Yeah.
And normal service will be resumed shortly.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will. Yeah.
bit of a nightmare?
We'll do.
Or another.
He should be able to dowse for what he should be able to dowse a map for the right internet cafe to take his portable to. So, yeah.
Or another quote from Douglas Adams. These humans thought that digital watches were a neat idea.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
So
you,
it could
everybody.
be Friday. Friday.
Okay.
We will see you next week.
Lovely.
We will be with someone anyway.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, David. That was great.
Yes. Bye.